Yesterday, the Senate notched a major bipartisan victory by processing a package of bills to keep kids safe online. Members of both sides of the aisle celebrated the return to good old-fashioned legislating, but unfortunately that was short-lived. We know the majority leader has teed up another yet designed to fail vote tomorrow before gaveling out for the month of August. In other words, we have maybe 2 days or maybe 1 day at the most that will actually be in session until September sometime. And then we're only scheduled to be in session about 3 weeks out of that month, out all of October. So even though we have almost 100 days to the election, we have just a handful of days which the majority leader has scheduled us to be in session. Why he would decide after 6 months to put a tax bill on the floor, knowing we would be leaving the next day, is beyond me. It does not strike me as a serious effort to legislate. In addition, as the presiding officer knows, the House Ways and Means Committee had a chance to weigh in on this. The Senate Finance Committee, on which we both serve, has not had an opportunity to even shape this piece of legislation at all. The chairman of the Finance Committees declined to have a markup of the bill in the Finance Committee, which I think would have enhanced the chances that we ultimately would get a bill approved by both chambers and on the president's desk. But these designed to fail votes, or show votes as you might call them, have become a familiar exercise in the chamber. In the last few months, the majority leader has scheduled show votes on bills that were guaranteed to fail, but maybe provided a talking point or two on the campaign trail. The Senate has held show votes, and by that I mean votes that are not designed to pass legislation that has not been processed through the committees to try to build consensus to seek if we can get a majority or a supermajority of the Senate behind them. The majority leader has scheduled these show votes on bills relating to the border, to contraception, to abortion, to in vitro fertilization, and now tax policy. All designed to fail show votes, not serious legislating. At the beginning of this year, the House passed the bill I referred to a moment ago that made significant changes to America's tax system. It was negotiated by the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, our Democratic colleague, Ron Wyden, and the head of the House Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, a Republican. They released a framework of this agreement in mid-January. The Ways and Means Committee immediately scheduled hearings and a markup, and by the end of January, this bill was passed, and passed with broad bipartisan support, admittedly. Given the partisanship that often grips Congress, advancing a bipartisan tax bill is no small feat, but they only got it half of the way there. They cleared the House, but we are the Senate, and we have our ability and, frankly, the need, if you're going to build bipartisan consensus, to be able to shape that legislation here in this body, starting on the Finance Committee. The Senate is not a rubber stamp. It was never intended to be, and it isn't today. Members of both chambers have a responsibility to evaluate and shape legislation before it goes to the president's desk. But you don't put a major tax bill on the floor after waiting 6 months, the day before we're supposed to break for August, and with very little time left before now and the election, between now and the election. Republicans and Democrats alike would like to see some changes to this bill, but of course, if we were to get on the bill, I'm confident the majority leader, because there isn't much time, would simply prohibit any real debate and amendment process and then try to jam this bill through the Senate. There are a number of things I would like to see addressed in the bill. I've voiced my concerns about the watered-down work requirement for the child tax credit, which would allow parents with zero earnings for a year to be eligible for a refundable tax credit. In other words, able-bodied individuals should be working and contributing to the welfare of their family and should not receive means-tested benefits when, in fact, the reason why they have no income is because they chose not to work. We cannot provide monetary incentives for able-bodied workers to stay out of the job market. Some of our Democratic colleagues have announced their opposition to this bill because of the pro-jobs tax reforms. But the bottom line is this: members of both sides of the aisle oppose this bill for various reasons. And there's one easy way to address those concerns. Move the bill through the committee process where we can shape the bill in both chambers and then bring it to the floor and allow for debate and an open amendment process. We know how to do this. That's the way the Senate should operate, and it's the way it used to operate. The Wyden-Smith tax bill passed the House in late January. So why did the majority leader wait until August 1st to bring the bill to the floor, knowing we would be breaking for the rest of the summer the next day? Right after the House passed this legislation, I asked Senator Wyden, the chairman of the Finance Committee, to schedule a markup, but he refused. He showed no interest in giving senators a voice in this legislation. Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I didn't come to the Senate to be a spectator while this legislation moved across the Senate floor. I expect to represent the 30 million people that I have the honor of representing on each and every piece of legislation that comes across the floor of the Senate or through the committees of jurisdiction. At any time in the last 6 months, the chairman of the Finance Committee could have scheduled a Finance Committee markup to allow members to try to improve the bill, but he simply refused. And the majority leader could have made this a priority for floor consideration by scheduling a vote in February or March or maybe April or maybe May or June. But he didn't. When did he schedule the vote? For tomorrow, August the 1st. He knows that's not adequate time for us to do what we would need to do in order to represent our constituents in the way that they have come to expect and the way they deserve. He could have carved out a little bit of floor time that otherwise has been used to vote on some of the nominations, but he didn't. Over and over again, he's refused to move this legislation through the regular order of the Senate, and then sat on the bill intentionally for 6 months and waited into the final hour before a 5-week recess to bring it to the floor. That's why we call this a show vote. It's not for real. But in light of the run-up to the election, this will be, I assume, a campaign talking point that Democrats will try to use to bludgeon their Republican opponents. In case there's any confusion, the rushed vote on the Wyden-Smith tax bill is not an honest attempt to pass legislation. Well, all this boils down to the fact that Democrats are offering two options on a bill that's not even been the subject of a hearing or markup here in the Senate. Take it or leave it. Those are the options that were presented. I, Madam President, will vote to leave it. Leave it to next year when we know, as President Biden has said, he wants all of these tax provisions that expire next year to expire, which will be a $3 trillion tax increase on the American people. 62% of taxpayers will see a tax increase. So we will revisit all of these matters next year. And we believe we can come up with a better product, one which will better serve American families and better help jumpstart our economy once again. Given the fact that the Senate needs to complete things like paying the bills, appropriations, the defense authorization bill, the farm bill, all of which need to be done before the end of this year, I don't see any window for wide-ranging debate on this topic, and it doesn't deserve a short shrift. So I hope we will next year revisit this topic, and I can guarantee that we will have the kind of debate I'm talking about if Senator Crapo becomes the chairman of the Finance Committee and we have a new majority come January. Madam President, I yield the floor.